So, I've been wanting to talk about this topic for a little bit, especially with all of these albums coming out and the rollouts being incredibly different than they used to be. I decided I wanted to talk about deluxe albums today. And I wanted to kind of make a comparison of where deluxes used to be in comparison to all genres, where deluxes are now, which has particularly pertained to the hip hop genre, especially. But let's start from where I think personally where deluxes were and what they meant. Deluxes to me were a release when the album that was released was either critically acclaimed or was commercially successful. And usually it would release around 6 months to a year after the initial album dropped. Usually you would get maybe 3 to 5 tracks, and these tracks would either be songs that didn't really make the final cut, maybe they were remixes, maybe they were acoustic versions. But when these deluxe albums and these deluxe tracks were released, they were more seen as a celebration of a body of work that sold a lot or was highly praised by critics and also the public. You can see examples of this. 1989 from Taylor Swift is a good example. Even though it's not particularly in the rap genre, that album sold massive amounts of copies and was generally received well by the general public, to the point where you did get a deluxe album. But now, we're looking into the 2020s and also the latter end of the 2010s. And the deluxe album has become incredibly prevalent in the hip hop genre, where you see tons of albums be released only to have the deluxe album or even a double deluxe released a week or two after it was dropped. And the big difference now is a deluxe album may not be dropped because of critical acclaim or because of good sales. Sometimes, and we're going to discuss the different kind of ways as to why they're dropped. One example could be because the album actually didn't sell that well, or it wasn't critically received the way the artist or the label wanted to. A perfect example of this is Culture Free by Migos, where the album did drop. It was a terrible rollout, a lot of just nothing. There was no drops, no kind of hints of music. They waited too long to release their follow-up to Culture 2, which Culture 2 was incredibly long, and it wasn't that great also. But the rollout for Culture Free was quiet until like the last couple weeks, where we had songs like Avalanche, and we had snippets release. The album dropped, and it didn't hit well with a lot of people. Honestly, for myself, it's completely off my rotation after first listen. I can't listen to it. It's not really my vibe. There's too many tracks. It's just not my thing. And some people like it, and that's totally cool. But I found the album to be bloated, and a lot of people were expecting good things about Culture 3. But, past that aside, it's like a mediocre to mid trap album. But it wasn't critically received. It also wasn't commercially received all that well. So, we see a week later, a deluxe did drop with 4 tracks, which, I mean, isn't all that terrible in comparison to another crazy deluxes that we've had in the past. But we also had the releases of basically 3 EPs, which were songs from the album, but instead we had Takeoff's Way, Quavo's Way, and Offset's Way. And you can definitely see the reason as to why this was dropped, because it didn't sell well. And when you have a lot more music to push out in different album formats, that means you have the opportunity to put it onto more playlists. The more music you put out, the more opportunity you have to put on playlists, which equals more streams, which equals more profit. So, pushing out quantity as much as possible so that way you can get it onto many playlists like Rap Caviar, Rap Life, all the stuff like that. Another reason why a deluxe may drop is to coincide with the initial drop to actually drop a whole new album alongside of it. And the big example of this, you could go with Nav with Good Intentions and then Brown Boy 2. But I think the biggest example of this was Lil Uzi Vert with Eternal Take, and then Lil Uzi Vert versus the World 2 dropped alongside of it, which was, I think, was about 3, maybe 2 weeks later. And the concept of this is pretty cool. I'm all for giving your fans new music whenever possible, and that's totally fine. But the reason why I'm not a huge fan of it is because sometimes the deluxe of an album, which is a whole album by itself, completely overshadows the initial release. So you could have, for example, Good Intentions dropped, and some people like it, some people think it's okay. But then you have Brown Boy 2, and you could have people gravitate towards that instead, which you kind of start to question, where is the focus? Where is the passion? Is it in Brown Boy 2? Is it in Good Intentions? Is it in Eternal Take? Or is it Lil Uzi Vert versus the World 2? And while we can look at it as like two separate albums, we're getting more music, sometimes the focus can be gone, as even on two projects, to the point where you get two mediocre albums and then they're gone from your rotation. I know people bump Eternal Take a lot. I personally do enjoy it. Some people even bump Lil Uzi Vert versus the World 2 a lot, which I think was okay. But that's another example of where you're pushing out music to get onto streaming services, to get onto playlists, to get profit. And now there's so many tracks being released. My only conclusion as to why all of these deluxes are being dropped, why also all of these albums are releasing in 20-25 tracks, and they're becoming bloated and long, is I don't think there's such thing as the cutting room floor anymore. If you really think about it, if you're going to create a studio album under a label, I imagine that getting a studio session to create the album is a lot of money, and it's a lot of time. And judging by the streaming world that we're in now, a lot of artists don't have that time, 1 to 2 years, which was the typical release date. You could, for example, 2015 you would drop a single maybe here and there, and then 2017, 2 years later, is when you would drop your next album. We're not in that era anymore, because streaming allows us to get the music, and the internet age allows us to get and want music right away. So the labels see this, Atlantic, Sony, you name it, they see this and they think, we don't have time for you to waste time in the studio and only create about 2 or 3 songs. We need this album dropped in 6 months, and we want as many tracks as possible. Because if I was a label executive, I don't know, especially nowadays, if I'm thinking in the mindset of a modern label executive, I would want the artist in that studio session to make as much music as possible. So that way it's cutting off costs and cutting off time for my other artists to use the studio time. So I imagine, as an artist, you take that studio time and you record as much as you can. In that span of time, maybe it's a span of a week, maybe it's a span of a day, maybe you do have that luxury of releasing within a month, or recording in a month span. And all those tracks you collected, all those tracks you created, you bring them to your manager, you bring them to your studio executive, you bring it to your people, and instead of putting an album that's only about 13, 14 tracks long, that could be cohesive and consistent the way that you want to see it, a person could see it as like, well, you have about 8 or 10 more tracks that could fit onto this album. Why don't we fit it into a way where this can be a 20-track album, or a week or two later, we'll push these songs out as deluxe. So that way we can still get our money from it, and you'll get your money as well. And all that studio time will actually see a profit That's the way I see it. Just basically, I don't believe the cutting room floor exists. I think that's the reason why we're seeing so many albums and so many of these playlists. You can see Drake as an example of this, where you're seeing 20, 25 tracks, and they don't all sound cohesive. Some of them even sound from the different sessions, but they're all collected together, and the more songs you have, the bigger quantity means the more streams. And you could think, I think of it this way, and the way it's changed now where quality albums don't equate album sales anymore. Now, everyone is exploiting the streaming game to the point where quantity is what that matters. Quantity is what's going to get you onto streaming services. Quantity is going to get you onto Rap Caviar, Rap Life, Hip Hop Daily. It's not about quality at this point. And that's the sad part about these deluxes. You do get good examples of deluxes. I can think of Mac Miller's Circles as an example of a deluxe. But then you get to the ugly, and this is where it starts to get really dicey. And this is kind of where I wanted to discuss this topic, is the Faith Double Deluxe from Pop Smoke. And there's a lot of mixed reception to poor reception to this album, and it is totally not Pop Smoke's fault. It falls on the management. And the album that was released, even though people say it's terrible, it's garbage, I don't think it's that bad. There is quality songs on that album. It's just really scattered and all over the place. And of course, it didn't have Pop Smoke's vision. So it's hard to find a cohesive sound to fit onto this album. And I believe it only sold 91,000 which, I mean, for a general rap artist is not terrible. It's actually pretty decent. But considering how Shoot for the Stars did, I think they wanted something along that magnitude. So, what do they do instead? Do they just leave it and maybe work on something else? Or maybe it's time to let sleeping dogs lie and realize Shoot for the Stars is the perfect way to end it? Unfortunately, no. We get a deluxe released on the Thursday next week, or the week after, because, of course, of Donda dropping at that period of time. And it was 4 tracks. Those tracks, I listened to them, and honestly, they are even more cluttered and even more of a confusion point than the rest of the album. Some of it seems unfinished. The mixing on the vocals can be a little bit shoddy. And you can see where the scummy tactics of a deluxe can come in. Not to mention a double deluxe was released a couple weeks later. And unfortunately, that's how the business works now. And that's just the way it is. It's happening more and more now. I don't know when it's going to see an end. But I personally, I am not going to have the biggest outlook on deluxes anymore. Because the deluxes I've seen seem out of focus. They seem not in the right intentions. And it seems like the cutting room floor doesn't exist. And if you think about it too, is in the Faith example, why would you waste these songs on a double deluxe or deluxe when you could refine those songs and make them crafted better, mixed better, maybe get different features? Why don't you save these tracks for future albums? Even though I don't think there should be any more music. As much as I love Pop Smoke, I think it's time to realize is that sometimes you're going to push the discography and push the catalog too far to the point where you're going to get songs that are incredibly unfinished and you can't do anything with them. So why don't you save those tracks that you have? Why don't you save those tracks that are close to finished or somewhat finished and put them on and make the most cohesive album as possible? And that goes for every artist. That goes for Lil Uzi Vert. That goes for Playboi Carti. That goes for Polo G. All of them are planning to release double album or deluxe albums. Why don't you save these tracks for a time afterwards? Because you still get your money, even though they're going to be hanging on the back burner. But oftentimes label executives and managers may not have the time to do that because, again, we are in the streaming era where things need to be pushed out immediately within 6 to 10 to 12 months, and you can't really wait anymore because everyone is craving music. That's why you have people craving for snippets. That's why you have people craving for leaks, because everyone wants music. So hopefully I got my point across, and I just wanted to have a general discussion on deluxe albums because I think it's a very interesting topic, especially the evolution of what a deluxe album is. So this is Sonic Spill. I've been gone away for a couple of weeks, but I'm trying to get into a more consistent schedule. I have some ideas planned of some videos, more longer discussions. I have a discussion on a very depressing, disturbing album called Giles Corey I want to discuss. That'll probably be more of an edited video. That may be more of a passion project. But for right now, these discussions are some of the best ways to get my mind across and put it onto something and to bring it out to the world, and we can all have a discussion about this. So, what are your thoughts on deluxe albums? Do you think that they're a good thing? Do you think they're a bad thing for the industry? Leave a comment, subscribe if you'd like, leave a like, and yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I'm sorry if it was a little bit scrambled and clustered, but hey, that's how discussions go. Sometimes it goes a little bit off the rails, but I try my best. So I hope all of you enjoy. Everyone stay blessed and have a blessed day. Thank you for watching.